Hello, people of the Tubely Googs. I am Mr. Spork, and these are Mr. Spork's hands. Today, here in Kachina Spork, we're talking pizza dough because I get a constant stream of questions in the food chat rooms and discussion groups, and even on the old radio show, along the lines of, "Hey, Mr. Spork, how do you make that rockin' good pizzeria-style thin crust at home that you're always bragging about?" Well, I'm going to give you all my secrets today and show you a method that's so bulletproof you can't screw it up. And it's so fast to make that you'll have zero excuses for ringing up Pizza Shack and spending 25 bucks on a pizza that you can make for half that at home. Not to mention you probably have better results than one less cardboard box in your bins. Of course, there's lots of different sorts of pizza out there, which means there's lots of different pizza crusts. This is the one that you use for high heat cooking. Crank your oven all the way over at 550 degrees or gas mark 50, the hottest you can get it, and you're usually going to cook it on a pizza stone. This is the sort that some people call a cracker crust, but I think that's a bit of a misnomer because even a thin crust pizza should still have a nice little bit of a chew to it on the inside. Now here's the big disclaimer. The science and chemistry of the dough that you need to make that crust stretch thin takes some rising time. It takes 24 hours of slow, cold rising in your fridge. I know it's a lot to ask. You can throw the dough together in 90 seconds, but then you have to exercise all of your pizza desires in and wait a full day. This isn't pizza for tonight, it's for tomorrow night. So let's say you're in the kitchen cooking a non-pizza dinner on Monday while something else is simmering or baking for a spare minute or two. Come over to your food processor and whip up a batch of this dough and you'll be ready to go for pizza on Tuesday night or Wednesday night or even Thursday night because it's good for up to 3 days while it's parked in the fridge waiting for your pizza urges. And here's the thing about my method. It's so insanely simple and foolproof. You don't have to worry with things like weighing the flour exactly or dragging out a thermometer to get the temperature of the water right. I've seen some seriously overcomplicated recipes on the web, and it's no wonder that you guys throw up your hands and say, "Forget that, I'm calling Pizza Shack." This is going to be so easy that you can memorize the recipe and that you can do it almost from sight. If you can operate one of these, and if you own one of these, and if you have one of these, you can make pizza crust at home just like the stuff that you get in the pizzeria. Okay, so let's dive right into what you're going to need for this project. First, the flour. You've got to use bread flour. Bread flour has higher protein and higher gluten content, and that's what we need to develop this long stretch of a dough that allows you to make a thin crust pizza. It's not going to work with all-purpose flour, so don't even try it. Just get yourself some bread flour. It's on the shelf right next to the regular plain old all-purpose flour, and it's usually about the same price. So don't get the wrong bag, get bread flour. And you're also going to ask how much for one pizza crust there, Spork, and I'm going to tell you some. I want you to train your eye to kind of get to know roughly the volume. The recipe, the way I've got this method set up, it will adjust automatically for however much flour you put into your machine. So if you make one pizza or you make two pizzas or you make 1.36 pizzas, whatever works for you, it's going to the recipe is going to take care of you on that front. I know you're probably asking, come on, give us a break. We want a starting point. Okay, this is 250 grams or about a cup and a third. But again, don't worry so much about the details. I want this to be so simple, you have no excuses not to make it. All right, you're also going to need some hot water in the bottom of your 2-cup, 500 milliliter measuring device. Don't worry about how much, just make sure it's the absolute hottest water you can get out of your tap, or even boil some fresh water like I usually prefer to do. And you're going to need some cold water. Again, we're going to get the measurement correct shortly. Make sure it's just ice cold, either straight out of your tap, or if you need to throw some ice cubes in it, if you live in Canada, you can throw a snowball in it. Whatever works, just make sure it's ice cold. You're going to need a little bit of sea salt, and you're going to need a little bit of plain old white table sugar, and you're going to need a little bit of fast rising, fast acting, rapid rise, sometimes it's called yeast. You're only going to need about a half teaspoon of that. Going to need a little bit of olive oil, and that's it. That's all that goes into a classic pizza crust. I'm going to get you there. Before I actually mix up the dough, though, I want to talk to you real quick about my choice of machines. You'll notice that I'm not going with the trusty old upright mixer dough hook combination. A fine machine, and it does a great job on lots of doughs. But with pizza dough, where we really want to fully develop that gluten, that is to say we want to knead it a lot, we can use a food processor. A food processor does a better job, if you will, of developing that gluten, because every 10 seconds or so of machine processing is the equivalent of a minute or two of hand kneading. And I think the food processor really is the right choice. It's also a whole heck of a lot faster. In this particular case, I'm using the plastic dough blade that came with the machine. I've tried both, and in fact, if your machine isn't quite up to speed, maybe the motor isn't quite as strong as it needs to be, sometimes people will get better results if they use the metal blade, the regular blade, if you will, on a food processor. So do a few experiments for yourself and see which one works best for you. Okay, so let's make this dough. I'm going to show you first my little trick for making the recipe self-adjusting, no matter how much flour you decide to put into your machine. You've got this super hot water out of your tap or out of your fresh kettle. You're going to take 1 tablespoon, yes, 1 whole tablespoon of sea salt. I know it sounds like a lot. Trust me, it will make sense in a second. Then you're also going to take 1 tablespoon of plain white sugar. This is actually sucrose, and yeast can't eat sucrose directly, but they do have an enzyme that'll break it down into glucose and, I don't know, one of the other oses, so that the machine, or so that the yeast, I should say, can absorb it appropriately. Now, you want to stir this 100% completely dissolved. Count to 10. Maybe even 15. What we're doing here is we're making a solution. We want that salt and sugar to be completely dissolved. All right, now here's where we get the measurement right. We take our cold water, making sure the ice cubes don't fall into it, and we take it right up to 500 milliliters. That's 2 cups, or just a little bit over 2 cups for you folks down in America, but 500 milliliters. Okay, there we go. We now have the perfect salt-sugar solution. So no matter how much flour we put into the machine, the salt and sugar content is going to be corrected by however much water the flour will take up. It's that automatic. It's super simple. Okay, so here we go. In with the flour, some, and I'm going to go on with the top. And we got to put in our yeast. Notice I'm putting the yeast in with the flour, not in with the salt water, because that would inhibit its growth just a little bit. I'm going to use, I don't know, half a teaspoon or so for every dough round that I'm trying to make. So in that goes, and because we're using the fast acting, there's no need to bloom it in water first, all right? And now, what you want to do is add the water in slow amounts. I'm going to see if I can get the camera right here so you can watch me put it in. And what I'm aiming for is the dough ball to just come together, probably even a little bit on the dry side. I want just a few dry crumbs left in the mix. Oh, and here's one other trick. If you happen to have a monster rosemary plant living in your kitchen like I do, grab yourself a little stem of rosemary, pull the leaves off, drop them in. It's a great place to add just a little bit of extra flavor. You can try it with marjoram, or you can try it with oregano. Anything that you really like out of the garden works really well. I'm just going to give this a quick pulse to mix the rosemary and the yeast in very well. And now we're going to start the machine and do the drizzle of the sugar salt solution really slow. Watch it make the ball. Letting the machine do the work. Smaller amounts as we get towards the end. I think that's just about right. We're going to let the machine again work the dough a little bit longer. And I think we're done. There we go. So let's take a look real quick and see how we did. And there we go. You can see the ball has just come together, and there's just a few little dry, crusty bits laying around. That's exactly what we want. Now we have to do what's called autolyze, and autolyze is just a fancy term that means let it sit, all right? All you got to do is walk away for 15 minutes before you come back to it to put it into a bowl for the rise. This allows the flour to fully absorb the water that we've added. So take, I don't know, 10 or 15 minutes. Before you put the lid back on, what you can do though is put in, I'm going to say a tablespoon, tablespoon and a half, maybe even 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Last little pulse just to mix that in, and boom, you're done. Walk away for 15 minutes. So while that dough continues to autolyze, let me give you just a couple pro tips from my pizza kitchen and pizza experiments. First, it's pizza stone time. This is a thin crust, high heat pizza, and that means you probably want to bake it on a high heat pizza stone. This actually didn't come from a kitchen store where they charge you way too much, I might add. This came from a pottery supply warehouse. This is a pottery kiln stone. And they come in all shapes and sizes. This one's round because it fits my outdoor oven, but I've got a square one in my regular home oven as well, and I leave it in there 24/7. It evens out the heat on all of my baking, and they're cheap. I think this one was 20 bucks, right? So nice and thick, half of an inch thick or so, and it's made from a material called corderite, which is rated for a bazillion degrees. You will not overheat a pottery kiln stone at home. Trust me on that one. So go get yourself one of these, a highly recommended option. If you absolutely can't bear the thought of spending 20 bucks on a pizza stone, that's okay. You can make this on a pizza pan, but you're gonna have to use a little bit of a trick. That is to say, you put a whole lot of olive oil on your pan, probably 2 or 3 tablespoons. And in effect, what you're doing is frying the crust in that oil from the bottom up. That will work if you don't want to use a pizza stone in this particular recipe. The other device to consider is a pizza peel, and that's basically just a big, huge, wide plank with a little bit of a taper on the end so that you can slide your dough off of the pizza peel and onto your hot pizza stone in that blazing hot oven that you don't want to reach into. You basically just put a little tiny bit of cornmeal onto the pizza peel, and that acts like 1,000 little ball bearings, and it slides right off and onto your stone with no worries. Something that's handy to have. If you don't want to spend the money on one of those, any kind of baking sheet without a rim on the edge will work. Just maybe use a little bit of extra cornmeal so it slides right off and onto your stone. Of course, you can't have pizza without toppings and cheese, and I think most people can sort out the toppings on their own. If you want straight up pepperoni, that's fine. If you want to do a classic Naples-style margherita with freshly torn basil leaves and shreds of fresh buffalo mozzarella spread around, that's great. You can do something crazy like a Mediterranean with feta and sun-dried tomatoes and artichoke hearts and black olives. That's one of my favorites. Anything will work on the topping front as long as, in this particular case, you don't overload the pizza. If you put too much on, the dough doesn't have time to puff up and do its thing. The #1 rookie mistake in making pizzas at home is putting too much stuff on top. So go easy on the toppings, work your way up till you get to the point that satisfies you. All right? Through the magic of television, I've made a stunt dough ball before. This one is ready. This is how it'll come out. Nice and stretchy. You should be able to touch it without it sticking to your hands. And then onto your workbench, don't put extra flour, just put a little bit of extra oil. Work it. And I want you to work it for, oh, I don't know, a minute. Remember that that food processor does a fabulous job of kneading. Every 10 seconds of food processor kneading time is probably 2 minutes of hand kneading, so you don't need much, just enough to get a little bit more of that oil worked in. Form it into a nice little tight ball. Put a little bit of oil in the bottom of some kind of a dish for rising. Cover it completely in the oil. I'm going to put that with a cling film tight cover on top of it. I'm going to put that in the fridge. I'm going to leave it there for 24 hours at least. Okay, Crusty Spork fans, as you can see, it's been about 24 hours since we put our dough to rest in the fridge. How do you know it's been 24 hours? Because I'm wearing a different shirt. And the dough has risen about 1.5 times. I've punched it down a few times making some video edits, but you can see that we've developed that nice long stretch of gluten, which is what you need to make a thin crust pizza. So you are ready to go and make some of the best homemade pizza you've ever had. So here we are making the final glamour shot with the dough. You see that it's been rested for just a few minutes out of the fridge just so it warms up to temperature. If you find it's a little sticky, don't hesitate to flour your hands, but try not to dump another half a cup of unrisen flour into your dough. I actually use a little bit of oil, but some people are more comfortable with flour. Your choice there. And you notice that I'm using basically my knuckles and I'm stretching around the edge of the dough. And if you find that it's fighting with you a little too much, just set it down, walk away for a few minutes, come back to it when it's behaving more like you want it to. But in this case, it's stretching nice and long, and I should be able to get it out to the size pizza that I want. And you notice that it's not tearing in the middle because we did that long, slow stretch. So once you get it out to the size you want, and again, it's springing back a little bit. I'll leave this alone for just a few seconds, come back to it, stretch it out again. So there you go. After a few minutes of letting it rest and getting the mood to be stretched all the way out, I was able to get the classic super thin center with just a little bit of a thicker rim around the outside edge for that crust you can hang on to. But I hope you realize that the salt solution method that I showed you will allow you to make any size pizza you want. You don't have to measure the flour. All you have to do is get that tablespoon of salt correct in the hot water, and you can make a big pizza or a small pizza or 3 medium-sized pizzas or whatever you feel like. Whatever your food processor can handle on the flour and dough front is the amount of pizza dough you can make at a go. Please give this a try. I know it's a lot to wait overnight for the rise, but it will give you that kind of crust that you only get in good classic pizzerias. My oven's blazing hot right now. I'm going to go put some sauce and cheese, and I think this is going to become a classic margarita with a little bit of basil and tomato on it tonight. Hope you enjoyed the video. We'll talk to you soon. Cheers.